This episode of the Second Floor Podcast is brought to you by Alberta Podcast Network. Locally grown, community supported.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our very first relationship episode where I'm very excited to bring on Naheed and Farah to represent, not only what a really solid foundation of what a relationship should look and feel like, but also just open the conversation and dialogue to maybe certain things that our guests have experienced or have thought of and aren't exactly too sure how to handle. And, you could say intention with this episode is for everyone to just feel more at ease with their partner or with any future partner that they choose to spend the rest of their life with by two people who honestly, I just get so damn happy when I see both of you on Instagram. It's like one thing to look at couples on Instagram, but I think it's a whole other thing to look and see and go to your friends and go to yourself and be like, oh, you could tell they're in love. These two, they have it good.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I want to start with you, Naheed. If you can share, just a little bit about what and how you would define love.
Oh, well, that's a great question. Love for us has evolved over time. It's had this consistency, but it's grown immensely with the birth of our children, with the evolution of our ability to communicate. Our love has grown and grown and grown. And I can honestly say at this point right now, it's so, it's just this amazing thing that keeps us tight knit. And as a family unit, not just Farah and I, but it's a shared love. It's a really hard definition because I feel it, and when I'm near her, I feel it, and when I'm not near her, I long for it, and so it's this connection, and it's, I don't know how to. It's a really great question.
It's almost like love is undefined. It's unexplainable from how you're saying it.
Yeah, it is. It's. I mean, you like you said, you can see it when we're together or when we talk, and even when we argue, it's like there. It's this thing, and man, it just keeps growing. So it's like.
Well, Farah's really good with her words, so I'm wondering if
so much more eloquent than I am. Yeah.
Are you able to piggyback off that, Farah? If you were to define love through your experience, what does that look and feel like?
I think Naheed's right. We definitely, the love that we shared when we first met and got together was probably more infatuation. I think we met when we were really young. And I think, we say it's love at first sight, right? We kind of locked eyes and had this instant connection. And we got married at 21 and 22. So, we talk about this with our kids all the time, that love is a shared thing, right? And everybody needs different things when they want to feel loved. And so as the years have progressed, we're heading up to 23 years on June 26th. I think our love has evolved, and I think love is like a feeling. It's like when you feel like you're home, right? It's not a place. It's like a feeling. And I think our love has definitely changed and grown. We have weathered so many storms, insurmountable, struggles, and things that would normally break couples, like illness, loss, being completely broke, students. We have just managed to find and cultivate that feeling.
It watered the roots of our love is what I did. All of those events, right? Yeah.
What's beautiful about what both you shared is clearly, I can feel in this room, and I'm sure people can listen. What both of you just said is the spark is there. It's a constant, and it's growing. It's ever evolving, right? And I almost want to say this where I'm guilty of this, and I had one of my best friend's wives tell me this point blank, and it really sort of makes sense for me, and I feel like both of you can really relate, is someone like me almost feels like I look at marriage and I look at truly falling in love and at a time where it can all work is, I need to be set. I need my career to be in a place where I feel like it's going to be, and then I can get my life started with my significant other. And both of you defy that odd.
We did the opposite. Yeah, we did the opposite.
Getting together, 20, 21, getting married, and I'm still going through the motions of life. I just want to hear from your perspective of how both of you have managed to almost put love first and reap and sow the benefits of it. Still being as successful as both of you truly are in your own respective endeavors, and how you both have even come together in some capacity with your own projects. It's like, how, based off both of you choosing love first, how has that worked in your favor, financially, professionally, personally even? Because a lot of people say, oh, you're so young, why are you getting married so young? You're still trying to figure yourself out. Like, there's that classic stigma, especially in the South Asian community. And this is coming from someone who, from a previous partner of mine, I got roked at 24. And roka, as both of you know, who don't know, it's like, you call it an engagement. Yeah. But like, I remember at that time, I was like, I feel like I'm ready, but am I ready?
Bucky, it's like, hey, you're done. You're like, you're just set for life kind of thing.
Yeah. So I was wondering, how has that benefited both of you? And how have you managed to defy the odds to choose love first? I know it's a loaded question.
We can do it collaboratively. Yeah. It's all good.
I think back to when, like, our whole story is just, it's so opposite of how we are, right? Like, for us to get married at 21, I had just graduated with a bachelor's in education. I had an admission for a master's degree right out of undergrad, which is not a good idea, by the way. So I'll talk you out of it. But grad school right after undergrad, I didn't have a job yet. We moved to a different city, a different province. We did all of the things most people do, like, on their own maybe, but we did it together. And for being such forward-thinking, independent, kind of liberal-minded people, we kind of did, like, just our whole life is a series of ironic twists, right? And so I think by no means do I think is love enough, because it's not enough. I think the ingredients that were necessary for our situation was respect, to truly listen and put each other first, outside of love, just like as respect as for me for him as a man, and him for me as a woman. And to be honest with you, I came from a pretty traditional family, but the one thing my dad told me was, you must get educated, a minimum of 1 or 2 degrees, preferably 2 or more, and you gotta stand on your own 2 feet financially. And that's kind of, my dad was definitely a forward thinker for his time, and like ingrained into me that education is your currency. And so for me, he knew, like, we got married and we took on all of my student loans, right? We had not a lot of money when we first got married, but what we did have was respect. And so putting love first is important, but it's also listening to each other and understanding, like, where you want to grow. And to be honest, we grew into 2 totally different people. But we grew into we grew separately together. And so I think what's interesting is when we think about love or partnership, or marriage, I think Western society, as much as we don't want to admit, even as Easterners, right, being raised with culture, we think in binaries, right? It's like all or nothing, independent or locked in. And we were kind of both. So I think from the beginning, we never did things most people did. When we got married, most of our friends were going off to university in different provinces. When we had our first child, Maya, I was 25, he was 26 and a half. None of our friends were married. When we moved back to Edmonton, because we moved to Toronto, and stayed out there for a couple of years, we came back with a 1-year-old. None of our friends were still married, and no one wanted to hang out with us because we had a baby. Just like a totally different life, right? But we put each other first. We put the respect we had for each other first. We took Maya everywhere we went. So I think it's a series of like ironic contradictions. And we didn't have anybody to look up to. We didn't have any role models other than our parents. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. But you know, honest to gosh, we did an amazing job with our kids. Like our kids are amazing. Like our 13-year-old just had a birthday party that the older two kind of just took over and planned. And they were hugging each other and thanking each other. And we were leaving the house and they were laughing at stupid videos and we're yelling like, clean the dishwasher. And we're like leaving the house. Like our kids are amazing. And we didn't have any rule books. We didn't have anybody to look up to. So I think, a series of ironic twists and like this idea of not to think in binaries, right? Like I was still going to school and like pursuing a career and I don't know what. I didn't think I was going to be an anti-racist educator at 21, right? Or 19. But letting each other grow into the human being that we needed to be happy, right? And we weren't always happy. You know, you're going to get the be real. Like we look great on Instagram, I'm sure, but you know, real life with 3 kids and 23 years of marriage wasn't always easy. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know, love first for sure, but I think respect is a really big one. And if the other person isn't happy, I'm all about making sure that you yourself are happy first before you can be happy in your relationship. But I also think that like, again, like to avoid binary thinking and thinking that only I can be happy because I make myself happy, but he also makes me happy. And my happiness is very much dependent on him and vice versa. What do you think?
You know, I'm going to rewind to a really interesting point, which was when we first met each other. And it was like this, we locked eyes. And it's a hard story to tell our kids because it's like a storybook. It's like we literally saw each other across the room. We locked eyes. And it went from there, but we were really young. And what we knew is that we had this feeling for each other. There was an emotional attachment. And as we grew up together. Mm-hmm. And that is a big defining factor in who we are, because that framework of building a life together and as Farah said, that every roller coaster that happens in someone's life, a new job, a new city, and no friends. And that was us in the first year, within the first 3 months of marriage.
One car.
Yeah, one vehicle. I mean, in Toronto. And she's from St. Albert.
Sharing a car with someone from experience, it's not easy.
Yeah. And I had never taken public transportation before. Like my dad would not allow me to go on a city bus. It was St. Albert, but whatever. I didn't know how to take public transportation. And so
there were all of these factors that, I mean, I grew up taking public transportation. I mean, I lived in the west end of Edmonton, so we had to do that. But it was like we learned everything together. Mm-hmm. And so if we fail together. And I think that was a big defining factor in creating that framework for who we are and what we are now. And we've continued to fail together. And the interesting part is that we're there for each other. And so when one fails or falls, the other one defines what that is and helps them get back up. And I think in a lot of relationships, you know, maybe that doesn't happen.
And, you know, both of you made such beautiful points there, because it's an arguable topic about compromise. Mm-hmm. But I find that what both of you have done is you didn't necessarily compromise. You both made instead necessary adjustments. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, Farah, you brought up a great point about how both of you have grown separately together. And I found that, yes, love ultimately does come down to respect. Because when you think about what you value, Farah, and I'm sure Naheed does too, is, you know, education. That's something your own parents have said and have instilled, right? And, you know, especially through you, Naheed, from what I know from, you know, looking online, is you had a lot of education from your own grandmother, you know, teaching you about a morning routine, and then, you know, your own family teaching you about accounting and just showing you certain skills of life that you're going to take with you forever. And then when both of you have met together at, let's argue, a very young age, still trying to figure out life, those intangibles seemed very much so like, listen, no matter what happens and no matter how chaotic our life is, I understand that you have to be in school for let's say the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And I understand that if this is what you need to do, we'll make it work. Instead of, and this happens in some relationships where maybe marriage comes about, maybe Naheed gets a certain amount of success or makes a certain amount of money and goes, hey, so what's the point? Why don't you just stay home and just take care of the kids and you don't need to worry about the vacation? And I'm not saying that this happened or didn't, but this would be the norm of other couples. And I find that it's very beautiful what both of you shared is like, in a way, it was all calculated chaos.
Calculated chaos, exactly.
And it's like, okay, we understand we're in this tornado, right? We're never necessarily in this feeling of being settled. And it reminds me of even my mom and my parents, where for a very, very long time, even as we were younger, we didn't get to fortunately be able to have a studio room where we could do our podcasts and side ventures in and a home gym. We lived at a time where we had no furniture. But both my parents, they understood. They're like, this is what we have to put our time into. And it sounds like both of you very much so, like, at least had that mutual understanding with one another.
For sure. I think that the tough thing, and again, raising 3 girls, right? So when we first got together, I was actually studying for a law school admissions test. I had taken the Kaplan prep courses. I was set to write my LSAT exam. He had just come home from a trip to Ontario. He was exploring business ventures there, and being a young hotshot 21-year-old with a very large ego, and he will admit that.
I was 23. Yeah.
You weren't 23 at that age. We hadn't even got married.
Yeah, 22.
20. Yeah. He came home and he was just like, we're going to move to Toronto. And I was like, So we had already gotten engaged, right? And in the Muslim community, especially my dad's community, we had to get engaged to kind of like be legit, right? And even then, like, there was problems. But so when he came home and he's like, we're going to move to Toronto. My first thought was, I'm writing my LSAT tomorrow. And he totally threw me under the bus. Totally screwed with my headspace. The day before the exam. All I could think about, like, well, that wasn't my plan, right? Like, that wasn't my plan. And I'm a Virgo, man. Like, you have plan A, B, C, and Z, like, and everything in between. Yeah. And he just went into like, A1, like, plan. And I didn't even have that plan. So I totally screwed up my exam. I was like devastated. I canceled my score that afternoon of the exam. And I was like, holy shit, what am I going to do? So that, I think that's how our marriage started. So already there's feelings there, right? But I think the point I'm trying to make is, when you have these ideas around compromise. So when we moved to Toronto, so I ended up applying to York University, the master's in education, because like, I don't know what the hell I want to do. I might as well just keep going to school, right? I'll get a job as a teacher and I'll just go to school. So not a bad gig, right? I got in, and so I had a plan. And so when we moved there, I was like, okay, so I didn't feel like I was like settling. I was making the best of my situation. And I think that's what we've done like all along. And I think he realized those first couple of years in Ontario, and when we had Maya and we lost money in the business, I was kind of like at the height of this amazing opportunity in my career. I had just finished a master's degree in equity education. No one was talking about equity education in the early 2000s. Maya was one. I had a dream job with an amazing board. I was going to do some like really amazing anti-racism work there. He came to me one day and he's like, we have to sell the businesses. And I was like, but I love my job. And he's like, we have to move back to Alberta. So that was blow number 2. My mom had just moved out to Ontario.
It's just 3 years.
3 years
within
in.
3 years. Yeah.
My mom had just moved out to Ontario after retiring with her school board after facing considerable amount of racism. And she was hired. So my mom, her dream was to become an administrator. And she kept getting passed up for jobs. So, ironically, in St. Albert. No big surprise. It's because she was brown. She was the only woman in her board at the time who even had a graduate degree in educational leadership. So, I said to my mom, you got to come out here and you got to come try here. And she had moved, she had retired. And my mom was like living with us at the time until she had found her own apartment at the time. And so I had to tell my mom, who's like coming out here to make her life, we're moving back to Edmonton, Mom, and you're going to be here alone. My dad was just finishing out his full retirement from NAIT, and he was going to move and join my mom. They were building a house. But like my whole idea of like raising our kids with grandparents that were close by, his parents were always coming back and forth for the business.
You put a lot of energy towards that.
And I was like 25 at the time. And it like I was so young, and that was my whole world was my parents, right? So to even move away from my parents to go to Toronto, and now I'm going to be away from my parents again. It was just like blow after blow after blow. But what did I do? Instead of thinking like I'm settling or, I just made the best of it. So we moved back to Edmonton. I actually ended up getting a job at my old junior high after about a year. And I was a teacher in a junior high. And then I was like, you know what? I'm bored. I need to go back to school again. So I actually applied to do my PhD, and I got in very, very young, very pregnant with our second daughter at that time. And he was actually acquiring a new business and another restaurant. And so when I got in for my PhD, he came home like 2 or 3 days later. He's like, so we're going to buy another business. I was like,
he's just out here dropping.
Yeah, just like throwing the cards, right? I was like,
this isn't the
awesome.
story you expected to hear, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
This is the be real, man. This is the be real. So, I'm like, okay, so I have a full-time job. I have a 4-year-old and an infant, and I'm going to be a full-time grad student. This is awesome. And you're going to be busy building this new business. So we figured it out, right?
Your mental resilience at that time, I can't imagine.
And I was 28 years old, I will say. 28 years old with 2 kids. I went back to school, and Sophia, my middle one, was 6 months old. I brought her with me, nursed her in the bathroom, put her in a little baby carrier. And I had like all the people saying, like all the people who were like my age now, mid-40s, like, oh my gosh, she's so young. Like, who's going to look after your baby? Like all the things that you would never say to a man, right? I was like, you know what? Fuck it. Watch me. I'm going to do it, actually. And I'm going to bring her to all my classes. But what did he do? When I had to start teaching in grad school, Sophia was probably 1 by then. Mm-hmm. And I said, listen, if I'm going to leave my kids with anybody, it's going to be you. So my class starts at 5. You need to pick up Maya from Montessori, and you need to be home at 4:00. And so we would often exchange kids at the university.
Right. Yeah.
So I would say if he couldn't make it for pickup, I would go pick up Maya, and I'd have the baby, and he would meet me on campus, and he would pick up the 2 kids, and he would take them home, and then I would go to school with my head totally chill because I know my husband's looking after the kids. Exactly. But he was a full-time businessman. That didn't necessarily go over well with his business partners because he's like, sorry, man, I got to go home and take care of my kids. Yeah. And again, I must have been 29 or 30 at the time. You were 32, new business. You know what it's like to build, right? So to your point, we were in the building phase, but we always made it work. So whether it was me sacrificing what I thought I was going to do, I wouldn't even really use the word sacrifice. I made it work, and I made it my own. And it wasn't on his terms. It was on my terms. And he did the same. He'd have to manage knowing that I had to kind of compromise. So he compromised too. And I think to my original point, when we talk to Maya, our oldest, about relationships, it's got to be mutually beneficial, right? We have spent so much time investing in our kids to be strong, independent women. But when you love someone, your happiness, your resilience, your courage, your accomplishments are also theirs too. And so again, avoiding this binary thinking that you can't be an independent, successful woman, and you have to be by yourself and you have to do it alone, right? I will fully say, like, I only finished grad school because of him. Like, second month in, you know, Sophia's 8 months old, and I took him out for dinner, and I sat him down. I'll never forget. And he knew why we were out for dinner. And I said to him, by the time we got to dessert, I'm like, so I don't think grad school's like, I'm not cut out for grad school. He's like, okay, so we have 2 girls. What are you going to tell them you quit? Are you going to tell them you quit grad school? Because I know you don't quit anything. I was like, you're an asshole. Like, no, I'm not going to quit. He's like, okay, so what do you need? Like, do you need help with, you know, help cleaning? Do you need help with pickup? Like, what do you need? We'll make it work. We were poor, but we somehow made it work, right? So it's knowing enough, like, we need to give some things up too, right? So, and that's not sacrifice. If you love the person, right? So it's not settling. I think a lot of people think that in order to grow and succeed and hustle and achieve, like I finished my 3rd degree at the age of 32 with 3 children. And I would not have been able to do that by myself. And I'm okay to say that. And I have to say that because I'm lying to myself if I think that I did that all by myself. A lot of it was me, but a lot of it was also him, right? And you need someone to be able, like, I got to give him credit and he has to give me credit. So
we unlocked each other's potential.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you can find a key defining word, and we didn't really understand what that meant. You know, we both, you know, a lot of the situations that Farah described in the early days were not me thinking about us or our relationship. It was kind of like, oh man, we got to go into damage control right now because this restaurant is like a tire fire. Like, we need to get out. We need to get out. And how do we do that? And I wasn't thinking about, you know, thank goodness we had restaurants here in Alberta, and that's why we had to move back, because it was like, I don't know where to go if we're in Toronto. Like, I don't know what to do because we're so in debt. And it was a really tough decision, but Farah was there to, like, walk through that decision and go, I understand. Like, I understand we have to go. I understand there isn't anything for you here. But the tough part was, like, now, you know, at that time and even now, I had to live with the fact that she was getting to unlock this potential, and I was like locking it back up, right? And moving back to Alberta. And so when you think about that give and take and how we talk about that, it was like, how now we get to Alberta, like, how do I unlock that again? Because now I'm the one that closed the door on that.
This episode of the Second Floor podcast is brought to you by the Edmonton Community Foundation. The foundation acts as a bridge between donors and charities to create a strong, vibrant community for generations to come. You can start an endowment fund with yourself or with a group. Once it reaches $10,000, it can start distributing funds. Vital Signs is an annual checkup conducted by Edmonton Community Foundation in partnership with Edmonton Social Planning Council to measure how the community is doing. This year's focus is on making ends meet in Edmonton. Learn more at ecfoundation.org.
Yeah, when both of you are sharing this moment, you know, a few things come to mind, and I feel like we can really, you know, go in more layers to the situation, because this is a situation that happens to many people that I find is going to perhaps define hugely what the next chapter of one's life will look like, down to where are we going to be living, how are we going to be making a living, how the way that looks, down to how do we put food on the table, how do we support our family, right? And it sounded like at the time, Naheed, for you, it was like, we need to do this, right? And even Farah, you realize, like, okay, let's weigh out the pros and cons. It needs to be done, you know, given the potential, you could say, disbelief other family members may have towards it, or already have some level of time, money, or energy invested in a move. And it's a tough situation because both of you, coming from what it seems, really respecting each other's families, it's very tough to satisfy everybody. So you almost have to just look at your significant other and look in the mirror and be like, we have to satisfy ourselves first before we could even think about everybody else. And I think that's a really cold hard truth to a lot of what wasn't said in this situation. And before we get into that, I more so want to go to Naheed's perspective, where, you know, what was going on through your head and when you were ready to tell Farah that we had to move back, or when you had to expand the business. Like, those were, of course, I've been there myself, where it's like you're almost so scared to tell someone something that you have to do something because it's almost at the risk of possibly losing them. I don't know if you were thinking that, but why don't you just guide us through like what was going on in your head in preparation of telling Farah this?
I don't think at that point I thought I would lose Farah. I didn't think that this was going to be, although it is a defining factor for relationships, I wasn't thinking like that. I was like, we're going to get through this together. We're going to work through it, and she's going to help me figure out how to navigate this scenario.
And that alone just says how healthy the relationship is.
Yeah, and it was it was a terrible situation, because if you go back, I was the one who asked us to move, right? And so here, I think this is going to be a defining factor for our family, for our relationship, for our growth. And it was none of that. It was like the opposite. So again, we said, new place, new job, and like we didn't have any friends. And then 3 years later, I'm like, hey, we got to pack it up and go back again. And that is also at that age, you have an ego. Mm-hmm. And you have an ego with other people around you, but I still had an ego with my spouse. I had an ego with Farah. And she was like, you need to like wake up. This is the reality of where we are. This is who you are. And I remember us coming back, and it was, I won't use the word sulking, but I felt like I was embarrassed. Mm-hmm. And I felt like an imposter. And I felt like an imposter to my wife, and I felt like an imposter to my 6-month-old, and I felt like an imposter to my parents who I was in business with. And it was, and Farah like literally walked me out of that. She was like, no, you're good at what you do. These are the scenarios that came in, and these are the curveballs we had to face, and how, we had to make a decision like that. So we agreed to that decision together. It was a terrible decision. The growth was, rebuilding again when we had the opportunity to do so. Farah's always acknowledged, she's just like, you are through and through an entrepreneur. I know that about you. And I know through and through, she loves education. She loves to learn. Like, that will be Farah forever. And she is such an intelligent human being. And it helps me. It's made me better. Because all of those things that she's done, every time she went to school, we'd sit, and it wasn't until later on when she was getting into her PhD that I really sat and like got to digest her knowledge and the things that I could learn from her. So it's like this amazing transition. And I think all of those things were meant to happen. Even though they happened in a bad sequence, it ended up taking us here today and bringing us to this point.
That's beautiful, because both of you so clearly know one another's, I don't even want to just call it strengths, but gifts, right? Like the gift to educate and to love doing so, and to want to give that to everyone, Farah. And then for you with your entrepreneurial drive, Naheed, like that's two things that both of you so clearly, based off the decisions both of you needed to make that included one another's livelihood, were clear on. It's almost like just having that person that just, no matter how muddy it looks right now, you just know that the other person who's with it in you has some sort of special power that you don't, that's going to help you get out of it.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point, and I think this is kind of the flip side of what Naheed was sharing. So, I wouldn't call myself a business person. I've tried to animate my life with different things outside of education, like the traditional sense of education, but still through teaching. I love teaching fitness, and tried my hand at different kinds of ventures that way. And I have also learned from his business savvy, like everything this kid touches, turns to gold. So we have the respect for one another, where I will ask him, right? Or he just kind of advises and will share things with me, or will always kind of, like you said, 3 steps ahead. Like, everything that has ever happened, he's called it, right? Whether I listened to him or not, he's called it. I opened up one of the first spin boutiques in Edmonton in 2015, 2016. He fucking knew. Like, he knew. He's like, this is not going to work. You want this so bad, but your personality and what you know and the kind of person you are, you do not mesh well with these business folks. And these 3 dudes were 10 years younger than me, super egomaniacs, super sexist. He's like, this is not going to work.
This is not your people.
This is not your people. But I wanted it so bad. I loved spin. I wanted to be one of the first, totally working from ego, right? And first 2 months in, I was miserable. It took off and it's incredible. It was incredible. But when I had to walk away, I was losing my hair, I was losing weight, my stomach, I had, stomach issues, my gums were bleeding. I was so busy. I think I got into a minor car accident. It just was not a healthy business. Yeah. We had to make a meeting, and he kind of, he's kind of been like my protector. He'll let me make my mistakes.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because the only thing could have come to mind right away, Farah, was like how much time.
Oh yeah, he knew, but he stepped in when I couldn't see it. Right, I wasn't sleeping. A cousin of mine she's like my sister. She lives in Georgia. One day she phoned me, and I used to I was so busy multitasking, and might I add, I was still teaching almost full-time at the University of Alberta. So I had almost full-time job, as a instructor, prof, but I was also running this business.
That's nice. And we had kids.
We had 3 kids. We had 3 kids.
Yeah.
So
that doesn't stop.
He let me figure it out though. And it wasn't until we hit this breaking point, and he's like, we need to sit down. I've worked this all out, and you need to get out. This is not going to go, this is not going to go well if we don't. So he let me figure it out. And just like he hit his breaking point, I hit my breaking point. I walked away from something I loved, but I loved it so much it was literally killing me. It was not good for me emotionally or mentally. It was so toxic. And he kind of, it's like he had that lifeline. He would have just yanked me back if I would have taken 2 steps too far. And likewise with him, he has this insatiable desire to build and build and build. And the problem with that is that he's so good at it, and he's always successful. And so, we're kind of like this perfect balancing act, right? Yes. I'll always, he loves to be accessible. He loves to be there for his people. He loves to be the person that, will help his people, the people who are helping him run the show. He loves to be there for them. But when it's time for dinner, your phone, we got to put away the phones, right? We got to show to our kids that we are mentally present. And for all those folks who are thinking about having kids or have young kids, it only gets harder. As they age, it's not about the physical staying up with them and feeding them and waking up with them and changing them and being physical man on man. It's the connection. When they come home and they talk to you and they need advice, or they're sad, or you need to check in with their mental health, so it's a constant, we play off each other's strengths. I can see when he's, having conversations with people, same thing. I'll let him go through the motions. And he was just having a conversation this morning or yesterday morning, and I was upstairs doing my hair, and, he was on the phone for 45 minutes, and I came, and he got off the phone. I came down. I'm like, you literally had the same conversation with 4 different people. I'm like, how frustrating was that? He's like, it was so frustrating. And then we had a great conversation. But sometimes when you're with someone who knows you so well, but also has nothing, I know nothing about, certain aspects of his business, you can really get an interesting perspective, an outside the box perspective. Yeah. There's been so many situations where in his business, I'll offer an outside the box perspective, and he comes home and he's like, you were totally right. So again, it's, I think we both have big personalities. We both have very, very, big dreams and hopes. And But it's all about also kind of like balancing each other out, right? And he will call me out on my shit like that. And I can also call him out on his shit just like that. And it's like at the end of the day, like we elevate each other. So it can't be a competition with your spouse, right? And there are times where he has the spotlight and we all kind of sit back and elevate him on his podium. And then there are times where I have the spotlight and he'll sit back and he'll elevate me on my podium. But we're always trying to bring each other along for the ride.
And it's under the same spotlight, not competing for it, right?
Totally.
And I love how you just mentioned that it's knowing when, who needs it, who deserves it, you know, that fresh outside perspective and being willing to hear it, right? I mean, it can be so toxic in some relationships where I'm sure you can imagine where it's like, oh, why are you trying to give me advice? You're not an entrepreneur. You don't know what's happening. Or, oh no, I'm the educator, not you. Let me handle this. But it's like, oh, let's hear it. I actually genuinely want to. And they can surprise both of you, and they can almost be like, oh, I didn't look at it like that. And I'm so happy it's the latter in that case, because I find such driven, successful people, such as both of you in your own respective endeavors. It's almost like you don't see this every day, right? Or you don't at least get to hear about it, because, you know, people are very private. You know, they're very private about that. They don't want to share, because it obviously comes with literally what both of you have shared, some crazy roller coasters. And that can affect ego. That can affect, you know, how decisions are made. I want to pivot to a topic, because we will get into parenting. I'm very excited to talk about that. That might even be a whole other episode. But I want to talk about like space and how much both of you respect one another's, you could say, personal life outside of both of each other sharing a life. And I feel like that has to do with time for friends, time for just yourself as a person, time for one another's families. How do both of you view that and make that work if it exists outside of everything else going on?
Our family dynamic is a family dynamic. We do everything together. So, you know, do we have friends? Yes. Do we meet with friends outside of each other? Yes. And we respect that. But like, she's my best friend. Like, she's the person that really, like, honestly, I mean, she's the person I confide in. She's the person I talk to. And I have friends that I talk to about business ventures, or that I talk to about, you know, their kids or my kids, but it's so different when we're having that conversation. But again, you know, Farah and I grew up with the love you talked about, but we grew up becoming best friends because of all the things we went through. And because we're so young, we went through all these roller coasters together. And it's been, like I actually love spending time with her. I mean, we are always looking to spend more time together. And during COVID, it was like a dream come true. We're always together. We're like taking walks together. We're having breakfast together, having lunch together. I mean, we're working in between, but it was like a lot of fun. It kind of sucks that she's back at the university teaching a class. So,
I'm glad you said that. You know why? I just want to quickly add, because I got that from my mother. Because my mother and I, it was like 2-3 weeks into COVID, and she's like, Kenny, this is when we're like really used to just spending all this time with one another. But she worded it. She's like, just know, Pata, that, you know, this isn't forever, right? Like, COVID's gonna end one day, and maybe you're sick of me already, but this is nice. Because she got to see me every day. We had the whole day. And she's like, when we were so busy, she's like, in our lives, well, we get to see each other for 30 minutes, 1 hour a day, maybe. Yeah. She's like, finally, it feels like both of you are just like little kids again. So she's like, anyway, it's nice. Go ahead, go back to your phone. I was like, no, Mom, that's really cute that you said that. But
we told our kids the same thing. We had all 3 kids at home, and it was like we're all learning from each other. We're spending time with each other.
Can't take it for granted.
It helps that we all have the same stupid sense of humor.
Yeah, I mean,
kept each other entertained.
Yeah,
right?
we have a lot of fun together. But no, we take the time when we need it. We take the time for ourselves as individuals, and whether that's going for a run and listening to podcasts, or going for a walk on our own, or taking the dogs out for a walk, or as individuals, or going and working out in the basement, or, you know, getting on the treadmill. So we do our own things, but we start our day together and we end our day together. And so what's in between?
Non-negotiables.
Yeah, and we have individual time with the kids too. So when I was coaching soccer for a number of years, that was my time with each individual child. I was purposefully taking the time to be their coach. So we'd drive there together and talk, and we'd decompress on the way home and talk. And, that's pick up and drop offs. And so we think, we spend time together, we spend time with other people. But
yeah, I think what's interesting is that, again, because we got together young, our circle of friends have shifted and changed over the years. And we spend a healthy amount of time together, as a couple, as a family, and it's healthy so that when we're not spending time together, we don't feel insecure about it. Right. And I think an interesting dynamic that we see often is that, people will, and everybody's different, right? I grew up in a household full of people. I was a middle child. I spend a lot of time alone, working from home and those kinds of things. So I don't believe that you can have balance, but when you have like a healthy amount, sometimes you have too much of one thing and too little of another. We're so in sync that we're able to kind of figure it out. Like today, for example, we're kind of like snippy with each other, and kind of like the energy was a bit off. Right. And so we just kind of did our own thing, and it's important to be able to read that and just kind of like unplug and go and do your own thing and then come back together.
We're about to go on a podcast together. They talk about
this is bringing it all back together. Yeah. It's really good. So
yeah. So I just think that when you have so much trust and respect for the other person, if he does his car shit and does like he likes to spends freaking 3 hours.
Wait, car shit?
Yeah, he loves to spend 3 hours like either right during dinner or when like nothing's cooked or we need to go get something from the grocery store. He'll be like in the middle of this 3-hour fiasco with his car. So his car is like, his
well, I'm
bestie.
washing the cars.
It's like a multi-step thing.
I'm giving
it's like a
time.
multi-step thing, right? But like it's fine. We respect that. And to be fair, we have 2 dogs that are girls. We have 3 girls. There's a lot of female energy in our house. So
he's one man.
Yeah, he's happy to go and do his, whatever he does. So it's just knowing when the other person just needs to like get out and just do his own thing. It's really loud in our house. So
yes. Hey, you know what? It is in ours too. It's never a dull moment, right? Yeah. That's awesome. No, I appreciate both of you sharing that. And I find, it's really unique to hear how both of you like clearly, genuinely like to spend time with one another. It's like, why would you not want to with the person that you choose to spend the rest of your life with? And I feel like that's what truthfully, like a lot of people now are recognizing and are a lot more aware of who they choose to spend their life with. It's like for someone like me, it's funny. I grew up watching Bollywood all my life, and I used to, and to this day, I'm like, I always wish what both you have. Like people just look, and the songs will come in my head, and and I'm like that token lover boy, where it's like, we still can live through both of you and realize that it can happen to people. Like there is true love out there. Instead of, I find a lot of people nowadays, they get older and they start feeling like they have to settle, and I disagree with that. I find that very unfortunate. Where parents might start getting involved in the South Asian community. They'll be like, oh, you're 30 now. Let us look for you. And it's like, oh, we'll do what worked for us. And it's like, well, everyone has their own timeline. And like when you put less pressure on it, it can be what it is, organic love story instead of something that's forced. And I find that whenever you force anything, it's chaos, and it's uncalculated chaos at that point, right? And I want to transition that into sharing, I think in reverse, what you may have noticed your kids have taught you about love, and how that has shaped you both to be stronger, more, you could say, present parents, but parents at the same time. As well as being more loving towards one another. I find that, as someone like myself who saw my parents grow up and, see struggle, see things that work, see things that don't work, I caught myself wanting to get involved And I know some parents are different. They either choose to, oh, no worries, nothing is wrong. And some are like, yeah, you know what, everything's wrong. And they'll either include their kids to some capacity or not. I'm just wondering, like, if there's anything growing up that was significant or anything recently that any one of your daughters have like really taught both of you a lesson on love.
You go.
We have open relationships with our kids. So when we are in disagreement, they're aware we're in disagreement. And they're frank with us. They'll call us both out on which one is the problem in this scenario. So the relationship we have with our kids is we're very transparent about the reality of a relationship, the reality of a marriage, the reality of being a parent, the reality of being a brother, the reality of being a son or a daughter. We talk about all of it.
Appropriately so.
Yeah. But we're open and honest. And I think that that's not a common thing. And for us, so we listen to each other and we learn from each other. Now, we may not agree with everything our kids say because, you know, sometimes you're like, but you're not seeing this part of the scenario, or maybe I haven't explained the whole scenario to you and this is what it looks like. But we're constantly working together to make each other better. Mm-hmm. And we have that relationship in our family. That's the ultimate goal, is for all of us to work to make each other better.
Mm-hmm. I think too, like with the girls, like we're modeling what their standard will be for when they, you know, decide, if they do, to find romantic love in another partner. And I think it was funny, as our kids kind of grew up and, you know, we would be out with our kids and people would ask questions all the time. Like, oh, like, did you guys have like an arranged marriage? Is that why you're so young? Like, how old are you? Like, and especially now with Maya being 20 and we're in our mid 40s, people are like, so how old were you when you had kids? Like, that's weird, you know? But in our culture, that's kind of like, or maybe not anymore, but it was pretty normal to have like an arranged marriage at like 19 years old and then have your children and you're set for life. Mm-hmm. We chose each other. We fell in love, you know. It's like it's very opposite to what usually happens, or what usually happened. And so again, a series of ironies. But we are modeling to our children, and I remind him all the time, like, my role as a mother is important, but your role as a dad is even more important, because you're normalizing what they're going to look for. And so, you know, we had a very stressful situation with a family member recently, that kind of has been worrying me since Maya was little, right? That, like, you know, she's going to grow up and see this and think it's like, this is okay. And we kind of put it off. And I was like, I'd always be the better person, turn the other cheek, be non-confrontational, be respectful. Until one day, Maya must have been like 9 or 10. And she's like, Mom, this person doesn't like you very much, do they? And I'm like, oh shit, you can see that, can you? And I kind of went to him and I'm like, we need to deal with this. Right. And then 10 years later, we had to finally deal with the situation and draw some boundaries with this family member and kind of, you know, just say, like, this is no longer acceptable behavior. And it was actually a conversation with our kids, all 3 kids, 13, 16, and 20, that said, you know, they were kind of teaching us about, like, their perspective on the situation. Because when you're family, you tolerate a lot because you're family. Mm-hmm. And I would say, being second generation and they are the third generation, they still have very strong cultural values. But it was actually our oldest who said cultural values should not be excuses for behavior that should not be tolerated. You can't hide behind culture. Yeah. No culture, you know, condones this kind of behavior. And so we were like, oh, wow. So having our kids, their children are like mirrors, right? So they mirror back to you what they see. And so
the actions, right? Brene Brown talks about
Yeah. Actually, my oldest daughter listened to Atlas of the Heart, and she's like, Mom, you need to listen to this book, and then make Dad listen to it too. it's fascinating. Having kids has definitely reversed aged us. I think we've become, just like, I feel like, it's done wonders for our relationship, just listening and talking and communicating with our kids. And I think what they've taught us about love specifically is that it has to be reciprocal, right? And reciprocity is giving more than you receive, but also not settling for like the bare minimum. And so that was a big lesson, I would say, just recently in the last like 2 or 3 months. But our kids have taught us so many things about love. I mean, that's another podcast for another time.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
No, I love that. And thank you for sharing, because, the first thing that comes to mind is, when you talk about generations, it's like, this is more common in my parents' generation, where it was like, okay, you have to marry because society approves it. Okay, now you have to have kids because society will approve it. Okay, now you have to do this, have to do that. And it's unique that you both did all the things you had to do, but did it willingly.
Yeah.
And then like raised a family willingly while still trying to build everything else. And I find that willingness needs to be there on both ends, because if you're just doing something because you have to do it, I think we see it in the workplace when you kind of look at someone and be like, do you want to be here? Because you're not showing you want to be here, so you're just kind of wasting your time and everybody else's. But then even from like the structure of a family and a household and love, and like parents that are, learning more about how to love one another to their kids, like there's so much willingness there. And I love how you just shared all that you could learn such pieces from your kids, because they give you such a different perspective, because they're not like, when they can almost see what you feel without knowing the extent of, you could say, certain things that you felt and seen and heard that they didn't, then it's like it becomes a reality check.
There's no faking it with kids, right? Like, or when you have like older kids, they see everything. As much as we think that they don't see it, they see it. And then that's where you kind of have to negotiate, like, okay, are we going to continue on this path, or are we going to like really kind of talk about what's going on? It's interesting because we joke in our family, our girls say, don't worry, we're not going to make the same mistakes you guys did and get married at like 21 and 22. Like we're good, right? But it's interesting.
20, right?
Yeah. But it's so funny because we go on walks with all of them, and the girls are like, wow, you guys, we left them home alone. We went to LA. As another secret, like make sure you like take time for yourself. So pre-COVID, we would try and go away every couple months, just the two of us. And my parents were amazing. They looked after the girls, but now the girls are old enough to stay on their own. And the last 2 times we went, and we've only left them like once or twice since COVID, like just by themselves. So my mom's always like arm's length away, right? Like Nani will be there to, cook and feed you guys. But, Maya had to drive them and drop them off, pick them up, manage like extracurricular. And every single time we've gone away and come back, she's like, man, you guys do a lot for us. Even the youngest this time said, Mom, and she's 13, you do a lot for me in the morning.
Don't realize that.
Yeah. She's like, you do a lot for me in the morning, and I know I give you a hard time. Like, that is the best, to hear your 13-year-old like give you props for like, and she's like, you're just cool, Mom. Thank you. So I think that's so important for kids to feel responsibility. But also, we go back to my story. We go on walks, and the girls will tell us, like, every time you guys go away, we realize, like, how did you have a kid at 24, or go to grad school and and 2 kids at 28? How did you have 3 kids and go to grad school again, like willingly, on purpose? Like, we can't even study with nobody home, and you had to study and like look after us and put us to bed and feed us and like, make dinner and like, and they would say to him, like, how did you do what you did with like all of these people who depend on you? And so I tell them all the time, this is the time in your life. Enjoy your life, because you have no responsibilities other than to clean your freaking room, empty the dishwasher, and maybe sometimes pick up your sisters from school and walk the dogs, right? That's it. Like, that's all you have to do. So it's a good checkpoint for them, right? Because, I would say we're all pretty privileged. We grew up pretty privileged. My kids are pretty privileged. And so just to have those checkpoints, like, of like, you want to see what adulting's like? Enjoy your weekend, like, let's see how that goes. Right. So it's an important conversation. And I think it also puts into perspective how hard it was, even though, again, we were super privileged, how much effort it takes to just keep building, right? And to do something with your life that you have something to show for, is a pretty awesome thing for your kids. That's an education in and of itself, right? We set the bar pretty high, but my parents set the bar high for me. His parents set the bar high for him. And so that's the goal, is like with every generation, it's that intergenerational legacy, right? Like, I am happy when my kids are successful. I'm sure your parents said the same thing to you. Mm-hmm. Our parents said the same thing to us.
They're our biggest fan. You should see my dad's Facebook. It's hilarious.
I love it. I love it.
Every post is just about me and my brother.
I love it.
Adorable.
I love it. I love it.
No, that's awesome. I want to ask Naheed this. Would you say your parents are like the best example you've seen of what a good, healthy, strong relationship looks like? Or would you have anyone else in mind that exemplifies that? Because, for me, I being the, token lover boy that I am and wanting to have something special like what both of you have, is I think about my really good friend Raj, and he's the, co-founder of Pivotal Physio. And he's someone who, over the years for me has been, outside of just a mentor and a brother and a best friend, he's someone who, the way his life is, how he makes time for his wife, he makes time for his kids, but he makes time for his business. Like, being able to see that within arm's reach, he's someone who lives in my neighborhood and we're very close. It allows me to kind of like have an example to look forward to realize that, okay, within arm's reach, this is possible. Even through both of you, I realize, okay, it's even that much more possible. But did you have anyone in your life, Naheed, or still have, where you've taken that example and extracted it into your own life?
Yeah, you know what? That's a great question. My parents have an amazing relationship, and they did. I mean, they immigrated to Canada. They struggled together. They brought my grandmother and my grandfather here. They raised us at the same time, having businesses and working multiple jobs, but every day they were home for dinner. And then after dinner, they'd go back to doing what they had to do. And so they'd drop us to school, and they'd make sure my grandmother would pick us up. And so there was like this big family unit together growing up, and my parents took their own trips. And so I remember thinking like, man, this is not cool. Like, mom and dad are going away to Vancouver, or they're going here, or they're going there. But what was interesting is they took the time for their relationship to keep it intact. And then we would do massive family trips. And we would do trips with cousins as well every year. So there'd be like, these 3 different trips that would go on. And so I think, looking back at that, their relationship was held strong by them taking the time out for each other, them taking the time out on a daily basis to check in with us as kids, and them taking the time out to show us that, the grandparents are important, and taking the time to show that family's important. And so we would all spend this time together. And my parents did a very good job of that. And so, when I look back at what I understood a relationship to be, and when we got married, we literally moved from our parents' houses into a place with each other. Like, we didn't live on our own before. So there was like no boundaries. We didn't know. My mom was like, yeah, good luck with the laundry with this guy, right? Like, I think that was the first comment she made to Farah. She's like, good luck.
And she was not wrong.
Yeah, so I've learned since then. Yeah. I've learned since then. I do my own, yeah. But it's they were a really great set of role models. And my uncles and aunts too, they were always, they would always spend time together, and they would always go and spend time with the kids and then without the kids. And so I think that those were really important factors for me growing up.
Yeah, I think it's very, you could say, it's a blessing, and it's beneficial that you had that around you, because I truly believe like when you grow up around that, that's such a big part of your upbringing and your values, right?
This episode of the Second Floor Podcast is brought to you by Alberta Blue Cross. Even if you're a busy business owner with more meetings than hours in a day, you are calm and collected when your group benefit plan is taken care of by Alberta Blue Cross. Your employees can manage their own health, dental, life and disability coverage online, anytime, on any device, making it easier for them and for you. To learn more and explore your options, visit ab.bluecross.ca.
I want to bring this to Farah. Perhaps our last topic today is, when certain, let's say, moments in life have happened previous to, you being in your partner's life, and let's say it has to do with mental health, and there's some trauma-inducing, let's say, events that happened to your significant other, where they're still working on it, right? And those things, they just don't go away. Do you have any advice, or do you have any, light you could share on the topic of how someone's significant other can help someone go through that? And I find, even just from personal experience with, in my life and with those that I've been with, including myself, there have unfortunately been just certain triggers that were completely out of our control. That would happen. And, one in particular to me, where it was like my first moment of, you could say, just like PTSD. It was where I was just, doing something in a room, and I ended up, knocking the blinds down. And, it wasn't my house. It was, I felt very bad about it, but immediately I was expecting a reaction that was not going to be the case. It was just based off what I've previously gone through. And I just realized that, okay, like this, I was shaking. It was something I was really fearful of. And the way who this happened with handled it very nicely. But it was clear that I had certain things I had to work on. And I didn't even realize it. Like, it was one of those things where everything's healed from certain things I've gone through in the past. But that one incident of breaking the blinds by accident led to me having someone else, I feel, handle the situation inappropriately. Like, maybe like yelling or maybe being like, oh, why'd you do that? Are you idiot? This or that. And it was through things I've experienced previous. And, I just share that because this is something I've personally dealt with, where I almost wonder how I can in the future be able to know how to handle these situations, but also even with people I've been with, where it's like, how can I ensure I'm careful of what I say, or how can I be there? Especially in a time now where a lot of us are open about anxiety, open about mental health. And I've actually, for when I first started to have serious relationships, I didn't know how to handle it. Like, I was very evidently like, okay, this wasn't a word I use a lot in my household. This isn't a word that I thought I've even ever experienced up until, getting into my 20s and really knowing what it is, and experiencing it. But I just wanted to know from your experience how maybe perhaps if both of you have gone through it, how you've helped one another out.
I think when you struggle with anxiety, it's easy to recognize it and not somebody else. And feel free to share whatever you'd like to share. But so Naheed lost his brother. Faisal was, how old was he?
It was in 2018.
Yeah, just recently.
Yeah.
He would have been 40 just a year or two ago. I grew up with Faisal. He was like my little brother. My little brother and him grew up together. And so when Faisal was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma, he was 29 years old. He was at the prime of his life, like total bachelor, right? Like just living it up. And so I think like my experience through Naheed, watching him, one, deal with the diagnosis of his brother, two, he was literally the pillar of his family. So he was supporting his parents and supporting his brother, and managing the business and running the businesses. There were multiple balls he had up in the air, and at any given time, one was always falling down. And so he kind of held it together until, I would say, even 2 years after Faisal passed, because he was always the pillar. Like, he had to be strong for everyone. But how he coped with his grief, because when you watch a family member be dealt a diagnosis, and we knew Faisal lived with that diagnosis for almost 10 years, and it was a palliative diagnosis. So that's really tough to know that this young man could die at any moment. Brings your life into perspective very quickly. It also helps you, like, you don't tolerate people's bullshit as like much as you would normally would. You just see life differently. But Naheed was, I mean, that was my experience. His experience was very much kind of like figuring out which ball was going to drop. He, he tried to help his parents. I mean, I don't wish upon anyone knowing that your child, like understanding your child's mortality is not somewhere a parent's brain should ever have to go. Like it's unhuman to conceive that your child can and will die. And knowing like that there's a time limit there. And so as a parent, that kind of drives you to do really, really horrible and amazing things. And so as a son, the oldest son, holding that up, I would openly say both our parents, not the type that would seek mental health support or acknowledge their mental health. And so that's also very difficult to manage. And so how I started recognizing his signs very early, but when you're trying to support a loved one who is grieving themselves, but also supporting the grief of others, is very complex. And so we, again, as a family who's always been a very open and vocal supporter of normalizing and prioritizing our mental health, he would always tell me, I'm good. Like, I'm good. Like I work out, I'm good. Like I sleep well, I'm good. But I started recognizing signs of anxiety in him probably faster than you did, I would think, because when you struggle with anxiety, you can recognize it in somebody else. And it wasn't until I took the first couple of steps last summer, and I needed to see a therapist. And we were very open about it in our house, and I just kept kind of putting it out there, right? And when you are struggling, you can't have someone sweep in and rescue you. You have to also want to seek support, right? And so I just kept saying, like, I really think you need to see a therapist. And it's really hard to say that because you somehow feel like you should be able to help him and solve these problems. But there's so much to unpack. And I'm not a trained psychologist. And there are certain things he probably could and should talk to a therapist that, maybe are not, that I might not be able to handle or support.
And I really appreciate you sharing that because, not to cut you off, Farah, but I once have been been told that too. And the way I handled that was, I could just tell you things. But I don't think that's fair on both ends because there's lots to unpack. And then for you, it's like, wait, but I can't professionally help you cope through a lot of this.
And I know some of the baggage that I was unpacking as a result of my anxiety with my therapist, it's just so deep, right? And I was experiencing some breakthroughs, and I just knew that if only he could experience this himself. So, I think he also reached a point where he started to see changes in me. And when, as or as people know out there, who you can recognize someone who's working on themselves, right? And when someone's working on themselves, it's really hard to be around people who aren't working on themselves or who have unresolved, grief or trauma. And, as you start to create and put up some boundaries, when you're working on yourself, it's hard for other people to understand or recognize these are boundaries, especially in the South Asian community. And so he was really open. He finally agreed to it probably in the fall, right? Mm-hmm. And started to see his own therapist. And And part of that actually, so we are involved in this pilot called Couplehood. So the creators of Soul Cycle, they sold to Equinox and kind of went on to other business ventures. And these women are brilliant. And, they did WeWork and they did some other incredible ventures. But all along, they had been working on this, and it's so, I'm going to try really hard to articulate what it is, because it's not therapy, but it is, they call it relational fitness. You would actually love it. Yeah. And so we had been attending this pilot program, Couplehood, since the fall. And so it was through Couplehood where Naheed got a little bit more open. He became a little bit more vulnerable, which is together in a safe space with other couples. And I'll explain how it works. And he just started to have these like kind of awakenings, right? And he's always been a very sensitive, calm, rational, level-headed thinker. But when you're dealing with your own grief and anxiety, those qualities sometimes can't help you. And so Couplehood is this space where it's all on a digital platform. You log in for 50 minutes and it's with people you've never met before from all corners of the world. It's 50 minutes and you do like a meditative type breathing. And again, as a very high strung, high energy person, that to me in a digital space, him and I were sitting like this and we're on this digital platform and the guide kind of takes you through this meditative breathing. And I'm like, this is weird. But it's only like 2 or 3 minutes and it's just kind of like centers you, right? Yeah. And we are usually flying from dinner. The kids are on the other side of the office, but it just gives you a moment to kind of check in and be like, okay, I'm here now. And then we can feel each other's energy. And then the guide kind of shares like a topic. So she'll talk about struggle, or she'll talk about hope, or she'll talk about these different topics, accomplishments,
or money.
And she kind of leads you through these questions. And what you do is you go into a breakout room and you talk about this question with your spouse, right? This prompt. And you get 4 minutes to talk and they get 4 minutes to talk. And then you come back to the main space and you kind of share. You don't share what you talked about, but you kind of share big ideas or things you learned about your partner or things you learned about yourself. And he really...
It was an awakening. It really was. It was like aha moments every single week. And so that started in like September, October. Yeah. And in November, I started going to therapy because that awakening, I could see myself just understanding things differently. And it was like my eyes were closed. And all of a sudden, they were starting to shift open.
Well, talk about why. Like, talk about the type of listening that you do when you're engaged in higher listening.
So we've got, there's a term that we use called higher listening, and it's an act in the space. Yeah. And so they ask this first question, and they break you out into, so it's just Farah and I, we turn our camera off and we turn our microphone off and we just face each other and we answer the question for 4 minutes each. So they time it and I talk for 4 minutes. And the objective there is not to, because you always want to, like, you're listening to actually respond. That's what most people do. And it teaches you, and it was really hard at first. First, it was hard to fill the 4 minutes and just keep, to keep this going. And you just, even if it's silence, it's silence. It's 4 minutes. And so you start to draw out these things, and you as the listener are now putting yourself in the position of the person that's sharing.
So it's developing empathy, right? You're really truly listening to try to get into his world. Try and feel what he's feeling. So if the topic was struggle, how do you experience struggle or something? As partners, right? We're always trying to solve each other's problems. We're always trying to jump in and save. We're trying to like figure it out.
I was about to say that. It's like, oh, I know what you're saying already. Let me just
Yeah.
finish this sentence
So you
for
stop listening, right? You stop listening. And it's hard when you're an educator, when you're a teacher, or when you're a man, a fixer, a problem solver, a protector. So it was really hard when he's talking about struggle. I just had to listen. Or if I'm talking about struggle, he just has to listen. And you can't interrupt. You can't give advice. You're listening to listen and understand. You're not even going to, like, I'm not going to talk to him about what he said. I'm going to talk to him about how I experience struggle. And so it's like these separate conversations together, right? And so he started listening to people differently. I started listening to people differently. And I'd have to sit like this, literally cover my mouth to not, and it's a physical reminder to stay present.
That's what I do.
Yeah. And in this digital world with 80 tabs open and on Instagram and Twitter, and like we grew up with this hustle culture where you pride yourself on having 80 million projects on the go. And this has taught us to really focus on one thing and do it really well. And so when he started listening differently and I started listening differently to him, it just changes your whole perspective. And it's actually, you find yourself doing it all the time. You go anywhere, and even the lady at the grocery store or the person at Starbucks, like you're literally listening. And we have lost our ability to communicate, specifically listening. And people are weird right now.
There's a lot of social anxiety.
Just so weird.
Yeah.
Like we're awkward with each other.
Awkward, right?
And there's this other version of it called peoplehood, where you can go by yourself, right? And you don't have to go with a partner. You could go. In fact, I'll send you the link and you can sign up. Yeah, they're still running the pilot. You can go to peoplehood.com and you can sign up for their pilot. You don't have to be in a couple, and you go in, you log in with and it's not more than maybe 8 people or maybe 5 or 6 couples if you go with a partner. But it's not therapy, but it made him open to the experience of sharing. And it almost kind of cracked the shell, and then everything just started to seep out. And then he was like, I think we were on a walk afterwards. And you're like, I think I'm ready to see a therapist. And I was like, what? Really? And
those are the two things, right? It was couplehood, and it was actually our walks that were the two things that really led us. So when the two of us were doing that together during COVID, we were communicating on a different way. Yeah. It was, we were in nature, we were next to each other. We weren't just facing each other at dinner or worrying about what we're going to eat or order. We just walk and we talk, and it did something magical for our relationship. And then couplehood took it to another level. And I'll rewind to what I said is our objective is to become better people with our families. So that's the objective of each one of us within our family dynamic, is to make each other better. And couplehood totally did that. I started to see, so Farah was in therapy. So I'm seeing the changes in Farah.
Within herself.
Yeah. And then through couplehood. So this is times 2, right? And I'm watching this, and it's I think you were, because it was the second or it was the third couplehood where she looked at me. She's like, I can't believe you shared as much as you shared during the share. Because I'm generally pretty quiet. I just listen and I'll say a few words. But I was I was out there and saying things that were surprising her. Or not surprising her, but sharing things that we would have shared together. It also, the topics bring up things that are really, sometimes they're easy to talk about. They make you feel good, but sometimes you're digging deep to have a conversation that's uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So sometimes they're uncomfortable conversations.
But it's only 4 minutes. It's only 4 minutes. It's fascinating. It's like a HIIT workout for your relationship.
Yes.
That's exactly what
That's such a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, and it's
the timing of it.
Or a HIIT workout for your own personal development, right? It could just be our oldest daughter goes. She was really experiencing a lot of isolation as she graduated in COVID. She didn't get any kind of ceremony. She did her first year online, super socially isolated, and she's like her dad, super social, extroverted. So I said, you know what, Maya, I think you should try peoplehood, right? And at first she was like, okay, mom, like, thanks, like, find me a friend.
Okay, mom, I'll join the
Yeah,
cult.
yeah, exactly. But you know what? She did it, and she gets up at 7 a.m. on like, what 20-year-old wants to willingly get up at 20 a.m. or 7 a.m. To join this group of people, and some people you'll never see again. And some people are regulars, right? And you're learning about yourself through listening to someone else's experience. And I'm learning about myself through listening to his experience, or he's learning about himself through listening to my experience. So back to your original question, how do you help someone who is in a place to help themselves? Is you gotta almost, create opportunities and just persistence and time. And they have to want to do it, right? And couplehood and peoplehood really kind of set the stage. Again, it's not therapy, but it helped him. It was like the pre-steps, like the preparation that he needed before he could take the next step. And going to therapy for some people, it's like a necessity of life. But coming from a culture where seeking mental health help and support is like, well, what's wrong? Exactly. Right? Instead of like, well, what's wrong with you? Instead of, instead of like, listen, man, I work out so I can age backwards. I eat well so I can feel good. So I'm doing all these proactive things for myself. If I go to the doctor, I go, we go for checkups. When, your physicals are really important. We don't only go to the doctor when we're sick, but culturally, you go to therapy when you're like broken, or when it's like past the point of, you getting help. So for us going to, and we don't go to couples therapy, we go on our own to work on ourselves. And so this couplehood, peoplehood pilot project that we've been so fortunate to be a part of really set the stage for him. It elevated the self-work I was already doing. And I find myself, again, like, I'm so able to take this into like so many different aspects of my personal and professional relationships. It's insane. It's insane.
Oh, there's so much I want to say about what both of you just mentioned. This is beautiful. First and foremost, thank you for being vulnerable enough to share, just such a personal, tragedy, and how that in a way led to just recognizing the importance of needing to focus on your mental health and doing that together. And on a personal note, I'll come up front and share this, where like I was almost in this pre-contemplation stage of personally being in therapy myself for 5 months, when in reality I can guarantee you I would have benefited from it 4 years prior, and I'm sure decisions I would have made and would have done would have led to however else my life could have looked, but no regrets. But as a South Asian male in his mid-20s who hasn't necessarily had anything in my life happened so traumatic to the point where it would have been recommended to have therapy, I felt like I could solve all my own issues, right? And I'm sure I perhaps speak on behalf of many people out there, but you made such a good point with how both of you came to terms with recognizing the benefits of therapy. Is I truthfully believe that there's solutions I've thought I've worked out in my head that have become a lot more clear when I've verbalized it. And I'm verbalizing it in front of someone who studies the brain professionally, but is listening non-judgmentally. And I feel like that was Naheed's first taste of what that was like through that exercise both of you have done in the couplehood, where it's like, wow, like I'm sharing all this to my wife in 4 minutes. I've got so much time, right? Like I got so much ability to be able to keep sharing, and I could fill the room with silence. And to be honest, in my previous relationship, I felt like, okay, like here's someone who finally is listening to me, giving me that time. But that came with, again, there was just certain things that were unresolved still. So my ego got in the way. I was like, oh, I'll figure it out. And then, to her respect, she's like, well, here are the benefits of therapy. Here's like, do it if you need to, but it's for yourself. But you'll see the benefits. And then, it actually very unfortunately took, us actually no longer being together for me to realize, actually, you know what? Let's take a stab at this. Like this could help. And I've caught myself where I would tell my therapist, or about to tell my therapist, a fabricated version of a story of who I am or how things have happened in my life. And then I'd be like, sorry, let me rephrase that. And it's because all my life, there's a couple of things I've unfolded where I'd be too used to telling someone what they wanted to hear. And the second piece of it would be, I just would want to look a certain way. So then there was like, let's call it demons, or there was just things that were going on in my head or decisions I've made that were just to please others. And then now this is kind of like the episode I'm currently in with my therapist, where we're finding solutions for that. I feel like Naheed said earlier, where we're digging deeper into certain concepts of who we are that make us who we are today. And we either choose to be that way, or we can find solutions to go the other route. And I find it beautiful that both of you are willing to share that. And, I'm 6 sessions into therapy, but to be honest, I find it should be there as a constant, just like the doctor visits, just like going to the gym and getting my reps in. And lately I've been thinking of how much energy and emphasis I put in towards my physical health. Why am I not doing that for the brain? And how is it fair to put that on to somebody that you're with when they may not be able to, like, other than just being a set of ears, they may not know how to solve it, right? So I just find it very beautiful that both of you do that for one another, and you do it in a setting where it's with other couples as well.
Well, it took time, I think. I think everybody, once you start therapy, it's like, why didn't I do this sooner, right? And I think, and again, I think a lot of stigma, it's up to I think we have a responsibility, like the collective, we have responsibility to normalize, mental health support, but also like we also have to use our privilege. And here's my anti-oppressive educator coming out to make mental health access kind of a universal human right. There are so many people who require mental health support and don't get it because they can't afford it. And I think that's like, we live in Canada, we have, healthcare that's accessible or should be accessible to all. I would argue that it's not accessible to all, or is the standard of the quality the same for all? And that should be, as like settler Canadians, that should be our basic platform, when we're voting, or when we are standing up, or like citing what we believe in. Access to healthcare, which includes mental health care, should be a universal human right. And we're so fortunate, and we're so aware of our privilege to be able to literally look through the phone book or scroll on social media or the internet to find someone who's a good fit. And there are people who can't even, won't even be able to afford to do that. And there's not enough mental health supports out there that operate on sliding scales. So I think as Canadians, that's our basic responsibility, is to make sure that everybody has access to that, because it saves lives, right? It saves lives, and it's so important. So I think the first thing we can do is work within our communities and work within our families. To normalize it and make it look like this is proactive. This is part of what it means to take care of yourself, not and fix this false understanding that like you need it when things are really bad, or for the quote unquote unstable, or everybody's unstable right now. Everybody is in some sort of crisis, or we have all collectively as humans experienced trauma through COVID, social isolation. People have died and not been able to, family members can't come to their funerals. And like, we have all experienced some kind of trauma, right? This should be a shift in our government policy. And I'm kind of getting on my soapbox here, but absolutely. Normalize mental health. Yes. I think it's so important. And when you see it in your partner, baby steps to get them there.
Yeah. And I love that, because it's not like do this or else. It's just like, hey, this is good for you, and give it a try. And then again, funny enough, how we spoke about it earlier with kids, where actions speak louder than words, is, when Naheed is seeing that the changes you're making through taking action on therapy, that speaks for itself. So as we close out, I want to go over kind of like quick fire things that maybe back and forth both of you can say on advice to those listening on how to we'll do kind of a few how-tos. We can do like up to 3. No matter how long you've been with your partner for, how to still charm them.
Do you want to speak from my perspective, or
I want a total of 3. And then
do you want me to
whoever wants
tell you
jump
what I
at it.
think works from him, or?
Oh, I like that. That's a good spin.
See, how do you you got to be specific.
Yeah, like I'd say, Farah, it was challenging.
Right?
I love it.
Oh, yeah.
Always pushing.
I need
Okay,
specifics.
I'll speak about what I need. Okay.
Done.
Okay. I mean, look at him. Right? For sure.
Still put in the effort to look
Yeah,
good.
he's got to be a little bit of arm candy for sure.
Done.
We have this connection with our eyes. So I think.
You're like taking my
I know,
answers. You knew I was going to say that.
You read your
literally said
mind.
that a couple hit last time.
Oh, I love
She's
that.
like, you're not supposed to talk about
I've
stuff
got
like
2
that.
out of 3 already, right?
All right.
The last one I think is just little things, right? Like noticing little things or remembering details. I think is a good one for me. Remembering details.
Remembering
turn.
details. Yeah, see, Farah wants
Beat
to
that.
know right now.
Beat that.
You know what? It's it's time and energy and effort. So
But that's one.
you
That's
stop.
one. Time, energy,
No.
effort
That's
is
it is one. It is
Okay,
one. It's
that's
3
one.
wrapped into
Okay,
one.
okay.
That's how amazing this answer is. So I'll come home and Farah is reading me instantly. So she'll come up and she'll just hug me if she knows I need a hug. Or if she knows I need an ear, she'll give that to me. She does a lot of amazing things. She'll set up date nights. And I'm not great at that. I need to get better at that.
Yeah, there you
but
go.
she's really good at doing that. And she makes every event special in a certain way. So she'll always do things that make our time together special. So it was the Botanical Gardens. She arranged a dinner at the Botanical Gardens. And we had the most amazing dinner. That's not something I would have ever thought about. The walks that we take, the walks weren't my idea. They were her idea. And it took our relationship to another level. And so she's able to do these things that are just, they seem like they're such small things, like a walk, but it was so massive for our relationship and our growth that it was exponential.
Now mine feel really
beautiful.
superficial. They were all related to your looks.
Nice. Yeah.
Your looks have been, it was infatuation,
Yeah,
right?
that
This
was
is what
already
drew
there.
me to you.
All right.
This is the balance, right?
Yeah.
I love that.
She's my own personal fitness instructor too.
Okay,
So it's
all right,
really-
all right.
If we want to talk about that,
Our kids are going to listen to this, so we'll stop right now.
I know, that's the best. I can't wait for them to listen to it.
Other than that, I'd like to, leave the floor open to both of you if you feel like there's anything else you'd like to share before we close out. Anything on the topic of relationships, any advice you want to give to those listening, after they listen to this, including myself. We can't help but want to be just more like both of you, right? Even after already feeling that way in the beginning. But is there any advice you want to share with anyone who is about to start living their lives together, or in another light, are trying so hard to make something work on both ends, but it just seems like it's not working? Like, just on the topic of letting love be love and continuing forth on focusing on one another, and not letting that spark die out. Is there any last piece of advice you want to share on that end?
growth in a relationship is not easy. It's not this big storybook fairy tale. You've got to work at it, and we work at it. We talk to each other. We have unpleasant conversations, even before peoplehood and couplehood, and we have uncomfortable conversations, and we're real with each other. And, if you go back to the question you asked about therapy and recognizing that, it was hard for Farah to talk to me about that in the beginning. Mm-hmm. But she started to see the cracks in what I was becoming by letting the grief take me over. And it's a hard conversation to have. And so there's going to be hard conversations to have. But you have to build that trust in each other and have that love for each other. And it takes time. Mm-hmm. And all relationships take time. And so sometimes I think the unfortunate thing is people just expect it's all magic, right? There's that attraction to each other, but you have to grow everything else. Everything else has to grow, and these roots need to get watered. And we've been watering roots for a long time. And so things take time, and they become better, and they flourish.
From a woman's perspective, I think it's so important to know who you are as a person first, and to love yourself first. And that was hard to do when, you marry your best friend and you're kind of growing together. I really had to, and I'm lucky that my children are not for everyone, nor there should be, but I'm lucky that my girls in their own separate ways were mirrors to my own insecurities, right? And how I talk to myself inside, and some of the perfectionistic qualities I had. And so you have to love yourself. Your partner can't fill the void for you. And I think so many times when romantic relationships fail, it's because you're looking for your partner to fill some hole that you have, a void that you have, that you should be able to fill yourself. And so you got to love yourself. You got to respect yourself first before you can show that partner how to respect you. And then secondly, you might not always know what you want, but it's also not up to your partner to kind of tell you what you want. And so that growing together but separately, or growing separately but together, kind of like branches on a tree, they all come from the tree, right? And so I think it's important when you have that foundation. And let me tell you, our foundation was not always solid, right? Like it like you said, it took time. It took respect, a mutual understanding. And mutual understanding doesn't have to be we're on the same page all the time. But at the end of the day, concessions will have to be made. I wouldn't call them sacrifices. I think, the reciprocity, the give and take is so important. And I see the younger generation and sometimes in my own children, like it's binary thinking. It's all or nothing. Both and. You can have both and. And so I think for us, this idea of both and was so important. We were both very, traditional. We were very culturally connected to our family. We're both loving children to our parents, but we are also a tight family nuclear unit that we knew there are going to be some things that we're going to have to, work on. And so both and you have to love and respect yourself. You can't get your partner to do that for you.
Wow. Yeah. That is such great advice on both ends. Thank you, both of you, for sharing that. And, for those of you who are listening to this, I hope you can get a taste of what the energy feels like in this room. And, both of you have, taken a lot of time and energy into being here, and I really appreciate it. I want to ask, is this the first time both of you have publicly been like on air together other than couplehood?
I think we did another podcast.
Yeah. Nice.
We did another, it's called The Lifestyle Chase with a friend of mine.
Yeah, there you go.
But it wasn't necessarily on relationship, I think.
Yeah.
Was it? Or it was just kind of, he just asked us some...
They were general. Yeah.
Some really awesome questions that also made us think. You podcasters know the best questions to ask. In fact, he sent us the questions in advance, and we couldn't sleep for like 3 or 4 nights. So
wow, there you go.
Yeah.
See, so maybe it's good that
It's better.
Christian Little's Lifestyle Chase is another awesome podcast.
Definitely worth checking out. Christian had me on to talk about the farmers protesting in India when we were running for them. So really great guy. Definitely check out his show. But that just goes to show, both of you, please do not let this stop. I find millions of people in the world are going to benefit from both of your stories. We're not quite at the millions yet, but
well, you might be, because we told the folks over at Couplehood and Peoplehood that we were
we
coming
told
on the
them
show.
we were going to be.
Oh,
So
thank you.
you might have some
Yes,
new followers.
That would be super cool.
Yeah.
And, just speaking of followers, is I hope both of you recognize that like everything we see online and everything we saw here is both of your guys' authenticity just as like people, as individuals, and as a couple, it shines through. And it's been a huge pleasure having both of you on. It seriously has made me consider continuing having these conversations with inspiring couples out there that like genuinely are working together at life. And I'm such a sucker for that, being the aspiring Bollywood actor I've always wanted to be, to, fall in love and meet that person with love at first sight. But it's so cool to see that both of you had that, and despite all of the trials and tribulations and hardships of life, both of you are still smiling ear to ear when you say each other's names. So it's beautiful to see. Anytime. Where can we get our listeners to follow your journey and to just continuously connect with both of you?
Awesome. I'm on Instagram and Twitter, Dr. Farah077, although my account is private. So if you look like a creeper or if you have no followers.
Both accounts are private,
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah,
so we keep it.
I won't accept your your request, but
You better write a cover letter with a photo and a video attached into
listen,
it. Right?
I've had some crazy folks, so it's not a joke when you're a South Asian woman who talks about anti-racism and how everybody's racist. It's not a good connection.
Yeah, that's
But
fair.
yeah, no, I'm on Twitter and Instagram.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good stuff. And how about for you, Naheed?
Same thing, just on Instagram, not on Twitter.
What is your handle?
NNS0075.
And also, this episode is unofficially sponsored by Brown Social House. So
And
for those-
California Pizza Kitchen.
Yeah,
yes,
soon to be
and
open.
California Pizza
Yeah.
Kitchen. When is that opening up?
We're looking at the end of July, beginning of August.
Nice.
Coming up real
It's going to be
fast.
awesome. I do have to share this with you on air, of course, is hands down. I'm not just saying this to toot your horn. My favorite patio to go to is Brown Social House, Windermere, is the indoor-esque patio with the beautiful fire that's on there, and then the couches. Every time, even if it's just me and one person, I walk in and I'm like, can me and my buddy
Take the
just
whole couch.
take the whole
I
couch?
love it. I love it. That was the purpose of the couch.
Yeah.
It's just to hang back and chill out.
I just melted my
That's awesome. I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you.
No, anytime, Naheed. I appreciate both of you. You're both welcome anytime. And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. Cheers. Thank you, guys.